I don't know. Just
That's what I said last time.
Okay.
That no one said anything.
Okay. Anyway, okay, let's continue. Okay, so it says here, where did we go? Oh, here we go. Early start to Shabbat. During the summer months when the sun sets late in the evening, it is common practice in many, but not all communities to daven Mariv and begin an early Shabbos long before sunset. There are many halachic issues associated with this practice that require review and clarification. And a question is it proper to begin Shabbos early? And it says the idea of extending Shabbos by ushering it in earlier than the required time has its roots in the biblical mitzvah or Tosefet Shabbat. Tosefet means to add. Ushering Shabbat in early doesn't necessarily entail davening Mariv before nightfall. However, the poskim did permit davening Mariv before its proper time in order to begin Shabbos early. Indeed, as far back as the Rishonim, Shabbos was ushered in early, and the custom persisted in many communities. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Then another question is, okay, so the text is actually cut off.
Can I ask you something, Kev, on your question, on your issue?
Yeah.
Even though it was established by the Achronim and the Rishonim, I would not recommend it today for anybody for one simple reason, is that to desecrate the Shabbos is so serious that it's not worth bringing it in earlier or taking it out any later than possible so as not to transgress inadvertently with mistakes. We all make mistakes all the time. A few weeks ago, I was getting some tape just to take some dog fur off pants when I went on Friday night, and the thing accidentally tore, or you forget and you're half asleep and you go to the bathroom or something. It's just not worth extending Shabbos earlier and later because of the sins involved for today's generation. I don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong.
I actually agree with that. I prefer to keep it as short as possible as well. Because of those reasons as well. Because I want to maybe make a mistake there.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good argument.
Kevin, continue to teach us, sir.
Okay, so say that I scanned a whole lot of pages. Okay, here we go. It says here, must all the members of the household accept Shabbos when the lady of the house kindles the Shabbos candles. So that's on another page which I don't have, but we can get back to that another time. Going back to Tosefet Shabbat, some poskim maintain that Tosefet Shabbos need not be explicit, either verbally or mentally at all. Simply refraining from forbidden work before sunset is sufficient. Thus, the congregation who daven mincha late are fulfilling the mitzvah of Tosefet Shabbos simply by refraining from doing forbidden work before sunset. Davening mincha after this type of Tosefet Shabbos will not be considered a contradiction to Shabbos, since there was no specific Kabbalat Shabbat that officially welcomed the Shabbos, obviously preceding that mincha. But that could be an issue. Because if it's still light and you daven mincha and you forgot to do something, then you might actually have a mistake, inadvertently do a malacha where you've mentally accepted in your mind that you've taken on Shabbos early, brought in Shabbos earlier. So okay, there we go. And let's just do one last point here. Although Shulchan Aruch rules that once Kabbalat Shabbat has been recited in shul, Friday's mincha may longer be davened, and if an individual came late to shul and answered Baruch Hu or said Mizmor Shir with the congregation, he may no longer daven mincha. So if they're there, just daven mincha quickly and then join them.
That's a great tip. Great tip. Okay, I made that mistake.
So let me just repeat that. Baruch Hu and Mizmor David. One cannot say that if you're thinking of davening mincha, intending to daven mincha because you came late. Don't say that. Just maybe go to the side I mean, or just daven without responding. And it says a private Kabbalat Shabbos, such as a woman lighting candles in her home, or an individual man accepting the Shabbos privately, does not preclude his or her davening the Friday mincha afterwards. Okay.
What do you mean?
Let's leave it at that. Okay, so no, you can daven mincha even if so. That's what it says, because it's adding, because it's still you still haven't daven mincha, but you're taking on Shabbos, you can still daven mincha. That's what it said earlier. You can still daven mincha, but then you can't do any malacha after that.
Okay,
that's it.
Okay, so just quickly, because we're on the subject of Tosfot, meaning literally additions, Gavin, there's a couple of pieces of information I've got for you and Arthur. I mean, Arthur knows this, I think. I don't know. But so Tosfot were the additions that were put on into the Gemara and obviously other scripts, etc. Now, the funny thing of it is, if you look at when it actually started, up until and including Rashi, the Talmudic commentators occupied themselves literally with a plain meaning, the pashat of the text, right? But after the beginning of the 12th century, there was a spirit of criticism that took possession of the teachers of the Talmud. In other words, they were now getting quite more analytical, and we wanted to see the depths, etc. So some of Rashi's continuers, like his son-in-law and his grandson, like the Rashbam, which is Samuel ben Meir, while they wrote commentaries on the Talmud after the manner of Rashi's, they were also a peculiar style to themselves. So the Tosfot, it's not a person. It doesn't also constitute a continuous commentary, but it's like almost deals with certain difficult passages that require a lot more explanation, if that makes sense. So it can be considered from the point of view of more of a methodology of learning Talmud than anything else, guys. And obviously the chief home of Tosfot literature was in France. You had the Riban, you had the Ram, etc., Rabbeinu Tam. But I mean, we'll go through that another time, but I just wanted to let you know that it really, really has added a lot of depth to the Gemara learning with both Rav Simcha, Rabbi Radko, and hopefully Schottenstein as well. So just in summary quickly of yesterday, and then we'll send a new link, is if you remember correctly, is the Gemara asked if the brayso in which Rabbi Meir ruled that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment when the animal was slaughtered on Shabbat or for idol worship refers to where he slaughtered it through another person. What's the reason the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir and exempt the thief from payment? Okay, because what we said, if the brayso refers to where the thief slaughtered the animal himself, and Rabbi Meir rules that he's obligated to payment despite the fact that he simultaneously is liable to execution, then we can understand the view of the sages. They subscribe to Kim Lepadi Rabbi Minna, which he stands liable to the penalty greater than that. But if the brayso refers to where the thief slaughtered the animal through the agent, then why do the sages exempt the thief from payment? Because the agent gets the death penalty and the thief should still be eligible for the fourfold or fivefold payment. So you remember that the Gemara answered, who is the author of the opinion attributed by the brayso to the sages? And we said it's Rabbi Shimon, who basically said that a slaughter that is not fit, in other words, that does not render the animal fit for consumption, is not termed a slaughter. So as we learned in the Mishnah above, in the 70th Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon exempts a thief who slaughtered the stolen animal if it's found to be treifa, number one, or if it was a non-consecrated animal that he slaughtered in the temple courtyard, because he maintains that a slaughter that does not render the animal fit for human consumption or for Jewish consumption is not considered a slaughter with respect to the four or fivefold payment. That's all you need to know. So there's a good reason. So the Gemara persisted with the question. So they said, okay, that's all great as far as the sages are concerned, that's the reason why it is excluded from the four or fivefold payment. So we understand as far as idol worship is concerned. We understand as far as the ox condemned to be stoned because you can't get benefit from it because the slaughter is unfit. But it doesn't explain why the sages exempt the thief from the fourfold or fivefold penalty in the Bryce's first case, where the agent slaughtered the animals on Shabbat. For a slaughter on Shabbat is a valid slaughter. That to me was a mind blow, as we said yesterday. So, because we learned in the Mishnah in Chulin 14a, that's the source, is that if one slaughters an animal on Shabbat or on Yom Kippur, though he's liable to pay with his life, in the case of Shabbos with his actual life, but he gets kares if he doesn't do a proper teshuvah, and on Yom Kippur with lashes, and he also gets kares if he doesn't do a proper teshuvah. His act of slaughter is nevertheless valid, guys, and the animal is for consumption. So the Gemara said, in regard to a slaughter performed on Shabbos, Rabbi Shimon, the author of the Sages, holds with Rav Yochanan Asandler. Because, in other words, the other rabbis are less strict and say that slaughter itself is valid. So then there would be eligibility to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Now, Gavin had a great question yesterday. He said, well, what do you mean the guy should lose his license? And we laughed about it. Well, not really. We said the guy loses his life. He loses more than his license. But we say, how can that food be used for a benefit in terms of slaughter? So for sensitivity, if somebody died over it, we're certainly not going to permit eating that animal. But we mean it fit for benefit purely in terms of the fact that you could wait, if there wasn't a death penalty involved, so to speak, you could wait until after Shabbat and eat it according to most of the rabbinic opinions. If it was, for example, cooked on Shabbos and it was inadvertent or etc., and if it was not inadvertent and done on purpose, then the actual sinner couldn't eat of it after Shabbos, but the rest of Jews can after Shabbos because it's no longer prohibited. We're going to go through the quick screenshot of what we did yesterday. But the bottom line is, Gavin, when it means it's also fit for benefit, it means that the original owner doesn't lose his share in the four or fivefold compensation. Because if it was used for idol worship, or you going according to Rav Shimon, who holds like Rav Yochanan Asandler, that animal you're never getting benefit from. So who loses out? The original owner at the end of the day. Because if you can't get benefit, it's no longer his. So in other words, he's not compensated for the four or fivefold payment. You said it's unfair. I said not quite, because they're still rendered the kefil payment. So Kevin, if you remember, Gavin's kefil payment was the actual compensatory amount of what the animal was worth, plus the penalty equal to that compensatory amount. So if that animal was worth 400 zuz, he would get the 400 zuz back in terms of the animal's worth and another 400 zuz in the penalty. So, Gavin, that really works out for the guy whether there's a fourfold or fivefold payment or not. Does that make sense? It still works out for the guy. The original owner, even if it's not fit for benefit, is still coming off good, even according to Rav Yochanan Asandler and Rabbi Shimon. But according to the other rabbis, there's eligibility for the four or fivefold payment. So what we said is, okay, so that's the case, very nice. And then let's just share the screen a sec so that you guys can just see a quick review, because we might as well use a bit of a Zoom time for that before a new link. So I'm going to share my screen. And if you have a look, guys, the Bava Kamma in the 71st daf, A3, cooking food on Shabbat. So cooking food on Shabbat is also prohibited, like slaughtering an animal. It doesn't result in the death penalty, but it's a problem. So Rabbi Meir is the most lenient opinion. Inadvertently, even the sinner himself can eat it on Shabbat, which I said to you guys was an absolute newsflash for me. Even the sinner himself can eat it on Shabbat. So that was, wow, that's certainly lenient. And deliberately, the sinner and others have to wait until after Shabbat, adding in the time it would take to cook the food. A Jew can't benefit from purposeful sin. So Gavin was also a little shocked there. And how can a deliberate sinner get benefit at all? And the truth of it is, if you're looking at the lenient opinion, he's not getting benefit on Shabbat. He's getting benefit after Shabbos when nothing is broken, if you wait the prescribed time for it to be cooked. So if it follows the consistency of Rabbi Meir's lenient opinion, it makes sense. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is the moderate remedy. This is how we hold today. So if the person broke Shabbos inadvertently, how did we say inadvertently? Maybe his clock stopped at, or his watch stopped an hour before Shabbos, and it wasn't properly dark, and he didn't realize that Shabbos had technically come in, or he wasn't aware that cooking was prohibited on Shabbos. He was a new Baal Tshuva. So then the sinner can eat it, but not during Shabbat. He has to wait until after Shabbat with adding the prescribed cooking time of what it took to cook that meal. If it's done deliberately, the sinner may never eat the food. That's how we hold today. But other Jews can only partake of it after Shabbat and cooking time, because they never sinned and they're not partaking of the benefits during Shabbos, and you have to add in the cooking time. That's the moderate remedy today. The strictest view is Rabbi Shimon, who holds by Rav Yochanan a Sandler, a very strict application, that if the sinner did so inadvertently, the sinner can never eat it. Never. But other Jews, if they wait until after Shabbat and the cooking time, they can eat it. That's for an inadvertent sin, not on purpose. If I didn't. So deliberately, the food can never be eaten by the sinner or any other Jew. So it's no eating benefit, but it can be sold or given to a non-Jew or a Gentile. Okay? So, since that is the case, just give me one sec. Give me one sec, guys. Since that is the case, the Gemara explains what's the reason that Rav Yochanan Asandler prohibited any Jew from ever partaking of the deliberately cooked food. In other words, the Gemara is asking, why does he hold by such a strict opinion? Rav Chia expounded at the entrance of the house of Nasi. The Torah states, and where's this? In Exodus Shmot chapter 31, verse 14, you shall observe the Sabbath, for it is consecrated for you, its desecrators shall be put to death. And when you look at the words, and you shall observe the Sabbath, for it's consecrated to you, by referring to Shabbat as consecrated, the verse compares Shabbat to an item consecrated temple. So just as a consecrated item is forbidden for consumption, so to the products of a forbidden Shabbat activity are forbidden for consumption. So, in other words, food cooked on Shabbos becomes intrinsically forbidden, according to Rav Yochanan Asandler and Rabbi Shimon, and it may not be eaten by any Jew, even if enough time has passed so that there's no benefit from the fact that it was cooked on Shabbos. Okay? So, if so, let us say that just as a consecrated item is forbidden only for consumption as well, is not only for consumption but for benefit as well, so too the product of a forbidden Shabbat labor is forbidden for benefit as well. So in other words, the general opinion is that on Shabbos if you can get benefit from it from eating, you can get other sorts of benefit. But the Torah dispels the notion because it says the Torah states it's consecrated for you. What does this mean quickly? It means that the Shabbat produce shall be yours to use. In other words, it's permitted for benefit. So it can be sold or given to a non-Jew, but not for eating benefit, right? It might be thought that that any product of Sabbath labor is forbidden for consumption, even when the labor was performed inadvertently. In other words, it might have been thought that the Torah's comparison of the product of Shabbat labor to a consecrated item pertains even to the product of an inadvertent Shabbat labor. So there's a further verse. The verse in the Torah says, its desecrators shall be put to death, which means that if it was a deliberate act of Shabbat desecration and not with regard to an inadvertent act of Shabbat desecration, in other words, only a deliberate Shabbat desecrator is put to death, not to an inadvertent desecration. So the Gemara, now the new part that we're going to look at is coming up with the shir now, is regarding Rav Yochanan Hassan's position. In other words, we want to know if he holds that his sourcing is basically rabbinic, or his sourcing is darabanan. That's what we're going to look at this particular point. Kev, you're falling slightly asleep.
No, I'm not.
Okay, your eyes are closing very gently.
No, that's because there's the shade on the glasses. That's what it is.
Okay. So, Rav Acha and Ravinu argue regarding it. One says that the prohibition against consuming the product of Shabbat labor is, according to Rav Yochanan Sandler, a biblical prohibition. And one says that the prohibition against consuming the product of Shabbat labor is, according to Rav Yochanan Sandler, only rabbinical. So again, there's Rav Acha and Ravina, and they argue, is Rav Yochanan Sandler holding a biblical prohibition or rabbinic? So the Gemara explains the source of one who said that it's a biblical prohibition, as we have said it above in the verse, Exodus 31, chapter 31, verse 14, and you shall observe the Shabbat, for it's consecrated to you, as expounded by Rav Chia. The source for the one who says that it's only rabbinical is that the verse states, and you shall observe the Sabbath, for it is consecrated. So when you say the word it is consecrated, but its products are not consecrated, what it's actually saying is the first indicates that Shabbat itself is consecrated, but not the product of its labors. So the verse can't then mean that the product of a Shabbat labor is biblically forbidden. That's the essence of the argument. Okay? So that's the reason that the rabbis themselves exempt the thief whose agent slaughtered the stolen animal on Shabbat from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment. In other words, what it's actually saying is it's indeed a slaughter unfit for consumption, and Rabbi Shimon, the author of the Sages, view the Brisa maintains that such slaughter is not deemed there was a dispute regarding Rav Yochanan Sandler's position. In other words, Rav Acha and Ravina argue regarding it. One said that the prohibition against consuming the product of Shabbat labor is, according to Rav Yochanan Sandler, a biblical prohibition, and one said that the prohibition against consuming the product of Shabbat labor, according to Rav Yochanan Sandler, is only rabbinical. So the Gemara explains, the source for the one who says that it is a biblical prohibition is what we said above, guys, that the verse says, and you shall observe the Sabbath, for it is consecrated for you, as expounded by Rav Chia, who said that just like the Sabbath is consecrated for you, so is its labor. Now, as you know, according to the other one who said it's only rabbinical, the verse in fact states, if you look at word for word, and you shall observe the Sabbath, for it is consecrated. Now, using the word it is consecrated, but its products are not consecrated, makes a distinction that this very verse indicates that only the Sabbath itself and not the product of its labors is consecrated. So the verse cannot mean that the product of a Sabbath labor is biblically forbidden. Okay? So the Gemara asks, it's well according to the one who says that the prohibition against consuming the product of Sabbath labor is a biblical prohibition. Why? Because of it, this is the reason that the rabbis exempt the thief whose agent slaughtered the stolen animal on the Sabbath from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment. So we understand that. But according to the one who said that it's only a rabbinical prohibition, we want to know why the rabbis exempt the thief from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment. In other words, since the slaughter renders the animals fit for consumption on the biblical level, even Rabbi Shimon would have to agree that it's deemed an act of slaughter and would obligate the thief in a fourfold or fivefold payment. The agent goes to death. So the Gemara answers, according to this view, Rav Yochanan Sandler forbade the product of Sabbath labor is only rabbinic. The rabbis exempt the thief from the fourfold or fivefold payment. They refer only then to the two other cases mentioned by Rabbi Meir. That is, they refer to where the thief slaughtered the stolen animal for idol worship, or whereto he slaughtered the ox condemned to be stoned. So all we're saying there is only in those two cases, if you want to hold it rabbinic, that the rabbis would exempt the thief from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment. But if you want to say it's biblical, like Rav Yochanan Sandler, they would exempt the thief whose agent slaughtered the four or fivefold payment. The thief would not have to pay it if you hold it to be a biblical slaughter. So it depends how you hold. Okay. Now the Gemara raises other questions with respect to the brisa. But Rabbi Meir, why does he hold that the thief who slaughters for idol worship is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment? Listen carefully, guys. This is going to get quite technical, but it's not a long piece. So basically, Rabbi Meir, why does he hold that the thief who slaughters for idol worship is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment? Once he cuts it a little, he renders it forbidden as an idolatrous offering. So what does we mean cuts it a little? Is the physical act of slaughter consists of severing the majority of an animal's trachea and esophagus, right? So there's a dispute as to the legal definition of shchita. There's one view that it's only the completion of the process that legally constitutes the act of shchita. In other words, when the act is finally done and rendered perfectly slaughtered, the animal. So the cutting of the trachea and esophagus prior to the completion of the act is viewed strictly as a preliminary procedure to the actual legal act of slaughter. Then you have another view in that the act of slaughter really only it legally begins with the first initial incision into the trachea or esophagus and continues throughout the process until both organs have been severed. So in other words, the entire process is one of slaughter. So obviously our Gemara at this point subscribes to the second view. So in other words, as soon as the agent begins the act of slaughter and makes his initial incision, an act of slaughter for idol worship has been performed to the animal, and it's rendered prohibited for benefit as an idolatrous offering. Right. So that's the first concept that you've got to understand. So as the Gemara says, hence when he cuts the rest of the amount required to complete his act of slaughter and thereby make him liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So what does that mean? Even those who subscribe to the view that shchita is actually from the beginning to the end agree that a thief is not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Why? Because it's worked on a different premise, and that's worked on the premise until it completes the entire act of slaughter. So, because the Torah has a pasuk for this, and it says, with respect to the liability, utvachor, and he shall slaughter it. Slaughtering it denotes that the animal was slaughtered in its entirety by the thief. So that's actually the requirement. Okay. So what happens then is when he cuts the rest of the amount required to complete his act of slaughter and thereby make him liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, it's an animal that's forbidden for benefit, and it's not an animal that the original owner commands ownership of, that the thief's agent is slaughtering. What do we mean? So we mean that the liability to the fourfold or fivefold payment is occurred only at the conclusion of the slaughter. Okay, because of that pasuk, which occurs after the owner has lost all his equity in the animal upon the initial incision. Why, guys? Because the initial incision, if you saying that's the point at which renders it forbidden for idol worship, then you've got a problem. You cannot even use it from when that idol worshipping process starts. And if you want to calculate the liability to the fourfold or fivefold when shchita is completed, then there's no equity left in that animal because it's rendered useless. So in that particular case, the thief might as well have thrown it into the fire, because all that the thief is now paying is the principal and the kefil. There's no four or fivefold. So in case you guys need a little bit of clarity, I'm going to do one thing at which I need Arthur's attention here, generally I don't, but for this I am, mate, is I'm going to share one of my handwritten charts that I lovingly put together. Give me a second. Let's see if Arthur is there. Mate? Arthur? Calling Arthur. More calling. What's it, Kevin?
Coronation
Awesome.
Arthur.
Yeah.
Same
Awesome.
Arthur?
Difficult to ride and at the same time.
Can you not, you can't look at the screen at the moment. Is that right? I'm sorry, mate. Just I need you for 1 minute. 1 minute. Just pull aside just for 1 minute. Sorry, mate. Literally. Apologies. But it's going to make it a little bit easier here. And then I'll stop. I just need a minute of your time. So, this is the definition of shchita. It's a ritual act of the animal that is kosher for eating, and it's a ritual act of slaughter to render it permissible to eat. So there's two opinions. What a surprise. Is shchita considered only at the end of the process, or does the ritual slaughter is considered to work at the beginning of the process with the start of the cutting of the trachea and the esophagus? Okay. Now, as far as kosher shchita is concerned, or for idol worship, either way, it's the same process. Some rabbis say that the beginning, and others rabbis say it's the end of the process. Okay. So, regarding the 4 or 5-fold payment for theft and slaughter, it only counts at the end of the slaughter. Let me explain to you why. So, there are rabbis that say the slaughter for idol worship or to render an animal kosher starts at the beginning of the process. So even if it's a little cut or incision, and that begins the shchita, the animal cannot be used for benefit if it's not for a ritual kosher slaughter, but if it's being used for idol worship. Because the minute you put your scalpel in, or the blade into the animal, it's at that point that the shchita process begins, and therefore, if the thief's agent starts to cut it, it's part of idol worship, and the agent gets the death penalty, and the thief does not need to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment to the original owner, as that animal is not allowed to be derived any sort of benefit from it. So only the double payment is made. Now, for the other rabbis who say slaughter for idol worship because at the end of the process, then the 4 or 5-fold penalty kicks in, guys, because it's applied just before you can no longer use the animal, and it's considered idol worship. So the thief's agent gets the death penalty, and the thief has to pay the 4-fold or 5-fold. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Was it easier to read it?
Much better.
Because Damon,
Yeah.
you say the who gets the death penalty? The thief.
No.
And the person who's
No.
who gets the death penalty? Who pays the 5-fold?
Okay, excellent question. If the thief committed a slaughter for idol worship, he gets the death penalty. So there's no 4 or 5
okay.
Anyway. Kim Labati Rabamine.
Yeah.
You only,
because that's a more stringent punishment. You can only receive one.
Exactly. So the thief has a partner here. He has an agent. The agent gets the death penalty. And the question is, why doesn't the thief pay the 4 or 5-fold payment? So according to the rabbis that say that the process of shchita for idol worship begins at the beginning of the incision, even a little cut, at that point the animal is derived to be null and void for benefit. Nobody can benefit from it. And at that point, whether the thief rendered it ill for benefit there or threw it into the fire, either way, there's no 4 or 5-fold eligibility, okay, because you can't use the animal. So that's in fact the problem. But there are other rabbis that say that only when the shchita is completed for idol worship, just like with kashrut, that hold by the same opinion, in that particular case, it's considered an idolatrous act. And since the shchita for idol worship, according to those rabbis, only kicks in at the end of the process when the esophagus and trachea is fully severed, just before that happens, the 4-fold or 5-fold payment kicks in because you've slaughtered an animal that you stole. And therefore, in that particular case, the agent gets the death penalty, but the thief is rendered liable to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. That's simple. So how do we resolve the issue? Very, very simply. Okay, and I'll tell you. I'll tell you what's decided upon as far as that's concerned. Is that the Gemara answers? Rava's got an excellent answer. The Rava's answer is the Brisa refers to where the slaughterer says that he means to worship the idol only with the completion of the slaughtering. Thus, the animal does not become an idolatrous sacrifice until the end of the slaughtering. It therefore remains permissible, even according to those opinions that say that the shechita generally begins at the beginning, because this person made a declaration that he considers idol worship. Only at the end of the shechita is when his idolatrous practice starts, and therefore it remains permissible and in the possession of the original owner until the end of the slaughter, at which point the thief becomes liable to the fourfold or fivefold penalty, because the animal is not rendered unfit for benefit until the 4 or 5-fold penalty kicks in, and then the animal is slaughtered for idol worship purposes. So there has to be a declaration in order to appease those opinions that say the shechita process begins at the initial incision. There's no issue when those rabbis say it's only at the conclusion, because then the 4 or 5-fold payment liability kicks in. And then I tell you what, I think, guys, I'm happy to end on this note. I don't want to drag it out further. I'm happy to end at this point, exactly at this point.
Okay. So any questions? So tomorrow I've got this appointment that's at 3:45. I may not be finished by 4:30.
So call us when
Hopefully
you
I will.
Dr. David Klevansky. It's very good.
Yeah. And then maybe we can do it after that, because what time does this function start? That you guys are going to?
Yeah, I'm just going to have a look.
I'm sure 8 o'clock, Gavin.
No, I think it's earlier. Let me just double check.
Arthur, I would invite you for supper on Thursday night. We will invite you in absentia. Okay. We're going out for a bite. I hope you're not jealous, Arthur.
Oh, look, I went out for schnitzel tonight, so what can I say?
No, the Damon, Gavin, and myself.